Please be seated. So after taking Easter Sunday off, we return this morning to our theme of the way of love, the practices that create a Jesus-centered life. We've got one today and one for next week, and then we're done introducing the 7 that we began introducing during the season of Lent. And today's theme is rest. Rest, of course, being a connotation of Sabbath keeping and the holiness of slowing down and stopping and taking time off. It's one of the 10 Commandments and very vitally important to us. We know that Jesus rested, as we read in the Gospels, that he often would steal away for prayer when the crowds were overwhelming him. And we know that in creation it was God who rested on the 7th day, instituting rest as a part of the natural rhythm of things. Now, for whatever reason, the editors of the book of Genesis did not include the story of what was created on the 8th day, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. It was on the 8th day that God created a sense of humor. Unfortunately, some people missed that day of creation. If you fall into that category, I'll apologize now, because the other thing that happens on this Sunday, at least when I'm around, is that we recall the feast of Holy Humor Sunday. And every year I have to remind people what this is or introduce it to folks who haven't been around for the Sunday after Easter at Christ Church in the past. It's a real day. I didn't make it up. You can Google it and read a little bit about the history. But I've used it almost every year I've been in ordained ministry, with the exception of 2020, when we had just gone completely in lockdown with the early stages of the pandemic before anybody knew what was really going on. And it felt like, I don't know that we should pull off Holy Humor Sunday in the midst of all this. I regret that now, that we probably needed it then as much as any time. And so with a Sunday like today, I was originally thinking I might not do it this year because we were supposed to be blessing the labyrinth at this service, the land across the road where it's going to be built. We postponed that. We are going to do it in May, but we're not going to do it today. We've got our Ukraine series starting today after church, and we're going to be talking about the seriousness of the war in Ukraine. However, it seems like it's a good idea to go ahead and continue with Holy Humor Sunday. And what it stems from is the idea that in the cosmic battle between good and evil, God gets the last laugh on the devil on Easter morning when Jesus is raised from the dead and there is no more fear of death. And so we laugh, we have a little fun. I always wear some kind of crazy shoes. I didn't wear the hat this year. I often wear hats, and I've got my Madras pants on, which do not match the shoes, and it's all fun. So for those who noticed the shoes on the way in, that's why the priest is wearing such strange sneakers today. But that's also to set up for you that now you're prepared for what's about to happen in the next few minutes. So the theme for today is rest. And this year gave me an opportunity to really understand rest in a way I haven't had to understand it for a long time. Some of you will remember that right at the beginning of the season of Lent, I had some oral surgery. Dr. Capes was my surgeon, a member of our congregation. He and his team are phenomenal. But for that first Sunday, a few days after surgery, my lower jaw didn't want to work very well. I was still benefiting from pain medications, which were great. And the anesthesia that they give you, I haven't had general anesthesia since I was 5 years old and had my tonsils out. I forgot that it really is restful. It does its job well. I mean, you are out, and then you're kind of out even when you're there until it wears off. So I may not remember everything correctly from those last moments before I started my dreamy time of oral surgery, but I remember that the tech who was doing the anesthesia said, well, Mr. Purdy, you have two options here. We've got the boat paddle and we've got the gas. Which do you want? And I just remember thinking, boat paddle? I'll take the gas. What's the deal with the boat paddle? I said, well, it's an either or offer. So now, for those of you with sharp minds for memory, you'll remember I told that joke in last year's Holy Humor Sunday. I usually don't repeat them. However, having had surgery this year, I thought it was more fitting, and to use it this year seemed like it was closer to the tooth. So, and I got to add that pun, so that's all good. The truth is, we all need rest. We learn this from the time we're wee little things, right? We know that babies need nap time, and young children need naps, and sometimes they won't take them, and they'll go, 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 and then they just collapse in the middle of the floor and sleep there for hours because their body is telling them, you have to rest. Now, as we get a little bit older, we're too old for naps, and that continues for a while into our 20s, maybe even into our 30s, where we don't need a nap. And then you reach the point in life where all you want is a nap, right? And that continues to accelerate. As we get older, we need a little more rest. It's part of the natural process of things. It's an indication that we're getting older. But I will say, just because we get older, just because you know someone who's gotten older and gets a little sleepier and needful of rest, doesn't mean you should take them for granted, because as we get older, we have more experience. We learn some tricks as we age that you have to be aware of. So in this congregation, we've had a number of bank managers and bank presidents, and I don't remember who it was that told me the story. It wasn't that long ago, but it was about a woman who was in her upper 80s here on St. Simon's, who went to her local bank, went up to the counter with her withdrawal slip made out, and told the young woman behind the counter that she would like to withdraw $10. And the woman at the counter said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, our policy is that any withdrawals under $100, you need to go out front and use the ATM. We don't do small withdrawals at the counter anymore." He said, "Well, I don't like the ATM. I can never remember my number. It's confusing. How about you just go ahead and give me the $10? "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's bank policy. I can't help you." So the woman thought about it and said, "Okay, then I'll just take all my money. How much do I have in the bank?" She's like, "Well, let me look that up." So she looked at her account and said, "Well, you have hundreds of thousands of dollars here, ma'am. We can't give you all that money right now. You have to call and make an appointment with the manager, and we have to make arrangements for that kind of withdrawal. You'll have to come back another day." "Okay, how much can I withdraw today?" The teller looked at her drawer and said, "Well, I can give you $3,000 right now." She said, "Okay, I'd like to withdraw $3,000. So the teller counted it out and put it in the little bundles and handed this woman her $3,000. She opened the first bundle, took out $10, and said, "Now I'd like to deposit $2,990. Don't mess with the people who've been around the block." That's the moral of the story. So we are aging. We're not going to live forever. All of us deal with this. This is just the way that it goes. The human body is all about slowly dying as we're living. We know that our cells are dying constantly and being replenished. Some cells replace themselves, some cells don't. We're most familiar with things like skin cells that scrape off and hair follicles that fall out or fingernails. We know as we age that we lose some brain cells. They are not one of the cells that seems to replicate itself very well. But there is a cell that has troubled scientists for a long time, and they ended up having to go to the theologians for an answer about understanding this particular cell in the body, because they really were having trouble understanding how fat cells work. And I think most of us here are familiar with those. We pick those up as we age too. It tends to be the case. And they realized that they're just really problematic, and they couldn't figure out what the issue was until they talked to a preacher. And the preacher explained it. And he said, "Well, I've come to realize that my fat cells have accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior because they never die. They just stay there." So if you feel a little self-conscious at times, just know that just means you're one step closer to heaven. Don't worry about it at all. Now, there are things that we do that are also life-enriching. They help prolong life. You read different studies at times. They seem to disagree on whether you should eat something or shouldn't eat something. Should you eat dark chocolate or drink red wine or eggs or no eggs and all this stuff. And you probably read things about coffee as well. We know without a fact that drinking coffee helps other people live longer. Right? Our parish administrator, Glenn Cleaner, drinks more coffee than anybody I know, and I'm glad in the mornings that he has his coffee. You don't want to meet the uncaffeinated Glenn in the morning. Now that said, there are things you don't want to do. There are things that will shorten our lifespan. Smoking is one of them. We really have come to understand a lot more about smoking and how bad it can be. But smokers have had to learn their own tricks as well about how to do things, because now you can't smoke in restaurants, you can't smoke indoors most places, you can't even smoke outside the entrances of most places. So smokers get creative to make sure that they can continue to grab their cigarettes when they need them. I went on a fishing trip with some parishioners recently, one of whom was a smoker. And we got out into the river, and he realized he didn't have anything to light his cigarette with. And I was like, "Well, then I guess you don't get to smoke." He goes, No, I have an idea. I always have an idea." So he took out his pack of cigarettes, and he took one of them, and he threw it out in the marsh. I was like, "What in the world is that going to do?" He said, "Aha, we are now a cigarette lighter." So the truth is, none of us can go on forever. All of us have to deal with our limitations, whether it's the ones at the end of this life or just the ones at the end of the day. You cannot go full out all the time without taking a break. We can't burn the candle at both ends. We know that bad things happen, and we need to have rest and respite and time for refreshment. That's just the way it is. Nobody is exempt from that human limitation, although we tend to think sometimes that we're special and we deserve special treatment. And there is another sermon illustration that helps make this point, and this one's historical. It's about King Ozymandias, who was waging war against the Hittites and was spending all the resources of the kingdom to keep this going, because you got to feed armies and you got to have your supply lines running and buy the weapons and all those sorts of things. And when he realized the treasury was getting low, he said to himself, I've got to do something to raise some additional funds, and looked at all the treasures he had accumulated in his kingdom. And he singled out this beautiful large diamond that was the crown, the jewel in his collection. And it was a big diamond that was known as the Star of the Euphrates. And he thought, I can get quite a bit for this. And so he went to where you went in the ancient world. If you needed to sell something, they didn't have the shops you can go to today, but he went to Croesus. And you know about Croesus from the ancient world, some of you. Had more money than God, as they say. So he would be able to buy things like this and help people fund, and then if they wanted to buy it back, he could sell it to them. So Ozymandias takes the Star of the Euphrates and goes to Croesus and says, I'd like to sell you this diamond because I'm trying to fund this war with the Hittites. So Croesus takes a look at it, he weighs it, he measures it, doesn't have the loops because it's the ancient world, but does his best to figure out that it's legitimate. And he says to the king, I'll give you 100,000 dinars for it. And the king turns bright red and he says, 100,000? I paid $1 million for it. That is an insult to me. Do you know who I am? I'm the king. And Croesus just looked at him and said, when you wished upon a star, it makes no difference who you are. So the Sunday after Easter is also always the Sunday we hear about the disciples, hidden away in fear, unsure of what to do with the Jesus who they've heard has been raised. In this case, they saw Jesus a week later. They're still hiding. Thomas doesn't believe in the resurrection. But it seems like it takes them a while to figure out that Jesus is raised from the dead and to understand what that's going to mean for them. It's an unplanned respite, a time of Sabbath for them, because when they were with Jesus, they were constantly on the go, always moving from town to town, village to village, fighting the crowds that needed to be near Jesus. And once they finally figure out what this means for them, we know that their ministry will take off at light speed again. And they'll be off and running, taking the word of Jesus to all the corners of the earth and preaching the gospel and all that it entails. So it's kind of a nice thing, although unplanned and perhaps somewhat uncertain for them, that they had this time off to rest. Because as they went out and did their ministry, they didn't always find success. Sometimes you're going to preach and people are going to respond. Other times you're going to preach and the words just don't seem to reach their ears. Now, in the modern era, we know that some of the causes for that can be very physical. We have gotten quite a bit of research and study done about how sound waves work and move, especially for things like preaching and how the voice works. So there's folks, as you know, that study how sound waves bounce off of walls and beams and pews and carpets and what helps it reach people's ears. And they've studied the difference between music and voice because they travel differently. Organs don't really need to bounce. They just sort of smash the room with sound. But they've also studied men's tones, women's tones, and that all operates differently, and you can make adjustments for that. And in the process of researching, they tried other things too to see how they could learn about all of the noises in nature and what helps and might help with this work of getting sound waves to ears where they belong. So they tested animals too to see how similar that is to human voice. You have a cat at one end and you listen at the other, and how does the cat's meow bounce off the walls? You have a dog bark, and does it travel all the way to where you need it? And most animals are pretty much like human sounds, just depending on what register they're in, with one exception. Strangely enough, pigeons. You have a pigeon at the front, you're not going to hear it at the back. Do you know why? I think you do know why. It's very simple. A coo sticks. That one always takes just a second. Just a second. Okay, I can see that bird jokes aren't going to fly here. So, actually, this one does because it's about flying. Did you ever notice when geese fly overhead and they're in that V shape? There's always one side of the V that's longer. Have you noticed that? Do you know why that is? Because there's more geese on that side of the V. That's right. The truth, though, of the geese flying in the V, as I'm sure you know, and this is not a joke, this is just science, they've learned, is that they fly that way because the geese back in the V are in the slipstream of the lead goose. It allows them to go further as a group, and they rotate who's taking turn in that front spot because the lead goose works harder than everybody else, and they get tired. And so when they get tired, they rest by falling back into one of the wings of the V, and they all continue, and somebody else who's rested takes the lead as they migrate. Even animals know the importance of taking rest. They know that to achieve things at times, they need a little help. We can't do it all. We can't go nonstop. So sometimes taking that assistance from the people around you is helpful. I had a really great opportunity to see this a few years ago when I was traveling in Europe. If you've been there, you know that in a lot of those cities, they're so old that they repurpose buildings. Rather than tear down a beautiful medieval structure, they'll turn an ancient church into a coffee shop or something like that. So I was in a grocery store, and I don't know what the original building was used for, but it was a weird layout. There were sections that were a few steps up and sections that were a few stairs down, beautiful stonework, and they just arranged the parts of the grocery store in these various up and down areas of the store. I met this guy in the produce section who must have been a Viking. He was huge. He looked like Thor from the movies. You know, blonde hair and blonde beard and just big and muscled. His name was Olaf, so might not be too far off. We bonded over tomatoes for a moment, just introducing each other. And then we went about our business, but I saw Olaf again in the back of the grocery store, and I got to witness something that was pretty moving. There was a woman there in a wheelchair who was near the area where the ice cream and the frozen pies and cakes and things are, and she seemed very distraught, trying to figure out how to get this chair down these steps. And before I could get to her, Olaf got there. And she explained to him, I was not that far away, so I was listening, that she was hosting this important dinner party and needed to have just the right thing to end the meal. She was hoping to find something that was light but had chocolate, but she just couldn't get down there to get anything. And so, again, this guy was huge. He just said, well, I can help you. And he picks her up, puts her on his back, carries her down the steps, walks back and forth in front of the cases while she looks at several things and picks out what she wants, brings her back up, gently sets her down in the chair and puts her items in the basket, and tells her to have a nice day and begins to walk away. Well, she yelled after him, saying, oh, wait, I don't even know your name. But he was already busy on the next thing on his list, and he didn't stop and turn around. So she, smiling, turns her wheelchair around and starts heading towards the front of the store. And here comes a man who turned out to be her husband who had been searching for her. He said, honey, I've been looking for you. Where have you been? She said, oh, I've been through the desserts on a Norse with no name. So, as we go along the way of love, leading Jesus-centered lives, rest is one of the things that we need to remember to take time for. We all require it. None of us can go without it. Right now, many of you are wishing that I would take a rest. I will give it a rest, I promise. My last thing is just to say, as we continue through this Easter season, as we continue to proclaim the resurrection of our Lord, I hope that we do have faith in the things that are unseen, and that we keep that faith and we keep on laughing. Amen.